Let's begin. Good morning. Let's try that again. Good morning. Thank you. Why, thank you. My name is Matt Ringel. I am in the professional services group at Akamai Technologies. That's probably why I'm such a perky morning person. I'm sorry about that. And today's talk, as you can see, everybody's got a first slide, Whiteboarding 101. Now, what this all came out of was, in professional services, part of what you do to actually talk with customers is you have to go through a series of role-playing exercises where you describe things on a whiteboard, you talk about things that the company does, and you have to talk to varying audiences, a hostile audience, an attentive audience, things along those lines. And so what you're seeing here today, in about 90 minutes, give or take, 85, will be kind of the distilled knowledge that I have over the past 3 years of doing this for internal and external customers. So we're going to take a poll, tell you it's going to be a little bit interactive. So put your hands up and keep your hands up if you have had to do an internal or external technical discussion to a group of people in the past month. Practically all of you. Keep your hands up, keep your hands up. Now, keep your hands up if you've done it in the past 2 weeks. About half of you. Keep your hands up if you've done it in the past week. About a third of you. Okay, hands down. We all do this every day. You know, whether it's, organizing your thoughts for a talk or talking with other people, the reality is that you're working on how you're going to communicate the things in your head to other people on a regular basis. You're building models that they can handle. And so what we're going to talk about today is what that means. So what we're also going to do is in the middle of the talk, we'll have a brief break for questions, so the rest of you can check your email. Because if I tell you you can check your email, then hopefully you won't do it during the talk. I mean, that's a vain hope, but I'm working on it. And then at the end, we'll save about 10 minutes for additional Q&A. So. A few assertions. Humans process stories. Humans process stories. We handle narrative. That's one of the most efficient ways to get things into our heads. It could be about, hey, here's this odd undocumented Cisco command I found. It could be, here's that way I found to actually hunt the mammoth faster and better. It's the same thing. We process things in terms of stories, in terms of associative memory. Therefore, it makes sense that the best way to get things into people's heads is stories. I'm going to assert that. A whiteboard equals narrative plus visuals. So you get all that in a picture show. You get to say, okay, I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to give you some pictures to go with it that are going to help guide that story so that this thought model that I desperately want to get into your brain is going to have some pictures attached to it so you know what to do. Humans are visual beings. So given all of that, what I want you to walk away with today is understanding a bit about how to structure a conversation when you're talking with people in a room, how to create a model for yourself of what that conversation is going to be, how to frame the debate, how to control the conversation, and then near the end, we're going to talk about a bunch of pitfalls that technical people tend to go into when they're doing public speaking, as well as a few particular problem audience members, not any of you in specific, I'm sure you're all wonderful people, and how to handle different types of problem audience members just so you can get on with what you need to talk about. So, where we're going to start is boundaries. when you're talking about a talk, a subject, something that you're going to discuss with a bunch of people, you need to determine what you're actually going to talk about. What is it going to look like? How are you going to say what you need to say in a coherent fashion? Because, you know, I can be in the bar and geek with somebody about this newest interesting routing convergence thing that I found, and the topic will bounce all over the place. And with a friend over drinks, that's great. That's the way it's supposed to be. But when you're actually trying to build a thought model and be more conscious about it with a group of people who may not share that same geeky glee over whatever you're talking about is, you need to build a bit more structure around it. And so, we're going to talk about boundaries. So, that's time. And that's abstraction. By time, I mean as you continue to talk. By abstraction, I mean how high level are you going to be when you talk about the thing? Are you talking about the latest bug you found in a router? And oh, by the way, did you know that if you malform this packet in this way and tweak these few bytes, you'll get where you need to, you'll be able to cause the thing to crash? Or are you talking about, well, there are these things called packets, and they go through the internet, and they get to where they're going hop by hop, and that's the internet. You know, what are you talking about? And so your horizontal boundaries, if you imagine, are what is the scope of your talk? What are the things you're talking about? How narrow is your topic? How broad is your topic? Necessarily, the broader the topic, the higher the abstraction level is going to be because you have to cover more ground. The more narrow the topic, the deeper you can go. Your verticals are talking about layer of abstraction. So for example, one thing that you want to find is you want to find this band of abstraction. Because if you break out too high from it while you're talking, you know, if you go up over here, then your audience is going to say, this person's hand waving at me. This person doesn't actually know what they're talking about. They don't know, you know, they started okay, but then they got really, really fluffy, and now I don't even know if they know what they're talking about, and I'm lost, and I'm going to go check my email now. That's the thing about smartphones. It's a lot harder to tell when people are actually checking their email. Break out too low, and now you have the problem that you're lost in the weeds. And maybe you find it fascinating. You as the speaker, that's the tricky part, you might not even notice that you're doing it. You might not even notice that you got into the weeds because it's a topic that's fun, that you love talking about. You love talking about the detail behind it. It's great. But yet, you've lost everybody in the room. Not to mention, you won't be able to cover everything you need to because you were so busy getting into the details. So, you know, hand wave, weeds. And so what you have here is, now we get to the first building block in determining what you're going to talk about. A, determine the horizontal boundaries. What is the scope of your talk? B, your vertical boundaries. Determine your layer of abstraction of which you're going to talk about this talk. Between the two, and write them down. If you're actually planning a talk, seriously, write these things down. Here is my scope, here's my level of abstraction. Because that is going to tell you what you can and cannot talk about. That's going to build the box. You know, thinking inside the box here, totally worthwhile. This is going to build the box that's going to make things worthwhile for you. And it's going to make things worthwhile for your audience because boundaries build comfort. If people know exactly what you're going to talk about, and people know how you're going to talk about it, they're going to be comfortable thinking about the topic when you're at hand, and they're not going to think like there's any surprises, which means they're going to be more receptive to the things that you're going to talk about. So we've talked about what happens when you break abstraction, and that's a problem. But one of these other things is breaking, as you listen to yourself, this is one of the things about speaking, is that you have to be constantly listening to yourself while you're talking. There's always got to be a loop in your head of, did I just say what I said correctly? Did it make sense to me? Does it fit with the talk that I want to give? How does this make sense? Because if you end up in this loop over here where you're saying, where you're checking here, okay, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. Wait, I broke out here. Then you can say, if you break out of that abstraction level, it's a near guarantee that the people you're talking to are not getting what they want. I can almost guarantee that they will have lost you one way or t'other, either because they've lost attention because you're not talking about anything that matters to them, or you've lost it because they're not technical enough for what you're talking about. So, if you catch yourself going too far into the weeds, the best thing to do in that situation is bring the sentence, whatever you're saying, bring it to a natural end. Say, yeah, and there was this thing, and I found if you actually tweak byte 3 and you actually flip a bit, it's going, and some really interesting things happen there. Let me bring this back up a little bit, because there's a couple of other interesting things going on. Bring it to a natural, don't stop yourself in the middle, and that goes into credibility, and we'll talk about that in a while. Don't stop yourself in the middle, but just bring it to a natural close and bring yourself back. There's no shame in saying, I got a little bit ahead of myself. I'm going to come back and start again. And if you bring it back, also it brings a natural close, so you pause, they pause, say, okay, I clearly lost some of you. That's okay. We'll start again. So the next thing I want to talk about, let's ruin my eraser. Next thing I want to, so can I erase that? Yeah, okay, great. I'm going to look for a bunch of vague nods. And here's where we get into some of the really interesting visual things, because they're very, very simple and very, very effective. Framing the debate. Actually, discussion. Let's call it discussion. I like discussion more. Got to choose your words carefully. We'll get to that in a little bit too. Framing the discussion. Oh, there's a mic there. So, you're up there talking. You have a thought model that you want to place in the heads of everybody you're talking to. And they're pretty much down with this idea too. So now, how do you, you've put boundaries on the discussion, you know what you're going to talk about, and you know the layer of abstraction you're going to talk about it at, which is great. But now you have to go to the next level of building that model. What are the primary things about that model? What are the primary features of that model? So, I'm going to draw something that's very, very familiar to a bunch of you on this board. Some of you may groan, some of you will nod in acknowledgement. How many of you have seen the Gartner Magic Quadrant? It is a man who knows the Gartner Magic Quadrant. So, 4 categories, 2 dimensions, low to high. Everything can fit in those 4 boxes. Anybody who's gone to business school is kind of going, yeah, we know, we totally know about that. And it's kind of, you start dreaming in magic quadrants. Everything can be separated into 2 dimensions and 4 categories. But that's the point. If I'm giving you a talk on this topic, and I put up the magic quadrant, and I say, for example, this is actually a real-life example. Web, robots, and scrapers can be divided into 4 categories based on usefulness and intensity, which can also be phrased as damage. How much of your infrastructure they take up. And I say, well, if they're high usefulness and they're high intensity, then, or if they're high usefulness and low intensity, we love them. If they're low usefulness and high intensity, we hate them, and then there's other stuff we do. Great. And that's another talk for another day. It's actually really kind of cool. I'm submitting it for a talk. So, point is, what have I done here? I have said that there are 2 dimensions you care about, and that there are only 4 substantial differences in the entire universe of bots and scrapers. I have just, and if you do not have an existing model in your head for this, and most people don't, because one of the things that people go to conferences for is in search of thought models. For how do I think about this new thing, or here's a new thing I never thought of, how should I think about it? Or alternately, no, I already have thoughts on that and you're wrong, which happens too, a lot. Now I've put a thought model in your head, and it's one that you'll take, because I didn't have one before, nothing terribly disagreeable about it, and that's the whole point of the Gartner Magic Quadrant. It teaches you, or it gives you a way, it hands you a way to think about something. But, so 2 dimensions, 4 differences. 2 dimensions, 4 differences. But what if I had a number line? 0 to 10, so 5's in the middle. Well, now, there's 1 dimension, and there's only 2 differences, with maybe some gradations in there, or 2 differences with gradations. So, whatever that topic might be, now you have another, you say, there's a single dimension I care about, there's only 1 continuum, there are 2 extremes, and there's a middle. That's a lot of assumptions right there. That's a ton of assumptions. But it's useful for thought models, for getting the sketch of a model in somebody's head. To take another example, I do love my Cartesian coordinate system. Bell curve. Everybody loves a normal distribution. What does that mean? I've now told you there's 1 variable with magnitude, and then it follows a standard bell curve, as do a lot of things. And because you are, and so I'm using an existing model in your head, much like I could use a power law curve or a log curve to talk about something that I want you to talk about. Say, this behaves like that. This behaves on a bell curve, has normal distribution, has all the things that come along with it, and because we're all fairly smart people in this room, you understand sigmas and exactly how that works and what the distribution will be. Gartner, I've told you that there are 4 fundamental differences, 2 dimensions, and I want you to think inside each one of those boxes individually as each one of them is distinct. Number line, 1 dimension, 2 extremes with a definable middle. There's tons of assumptions built into each of those models. But each of them is a handy way of thinking about whatever you want to talk about with a person. So, what comes next after that? Is asserting the problem. And by asserting the problem, my handwriting's just going to get sloppier throughout this, just going to have to deal with that. You can leave that for the end. So, asserting the problem. Although I do have to fix that up a little bit. So, asserting the problem. What you're saying is, I'm going to tell you what the problem is. Or I'm going to tell you the thing I desire to assert is, enterprises are moving to the cloud. Sure, a few of you are in favor of that. A couple of you might disagree with that. Most of you won't. But by saying enterprises are moving to the cloud, what have I said? So I'm just going to take that part. This is going to be like 5th grade diagramming a sentence for a bit, so just bear with me. Are moving to the cloud. Giving you a who. There's a talk about enterprises. We probably don't care, in the concept of this talk, we probably don't care about ISPs. ISPs are now out of scope for this talk just because I said the word enterprise. I've now began to shrink down the topic. Are moving. There's transition. There's not a current state. There's a current state, there's an end state. They're moving between them. We assume the beginning state here. But now we're talking about, we are asserting that there is movement towards that. It's not if it's happening, it's how it's happening. It's when it's happening. To the cloud. Where? So I've given you the two endpoints, I've given you the transition between them, and all we're talking about now is negotiating over how that's happening. And that might sound a little bit sneaky, but really, what you're talking about here is you want to narrow down the conversation so you actually have something to talk about. Because otherwise, you can end up in a conversation, and I'm sure you've all done it, where you can be talking for an hour of this far-ranging topics, and if it's a meeting where you're supposed to have actionable items done, you may not actually get to anywhere because you had a fun discussion. It was great discussion over drinks, but you never actually got anything done because you're never able to define what you were actually talking about. Let me give you an example that's a little bit non-technical. This was one of the best, shortest pieces of advertising in recent history. One of the best things in advertising history. What happened there? Well, a certain beer company did something very interesting. They said, we don't want you talking about other beers. We want to change the debate from being between light lager A and light lager B and light lager C. What we instead want to do is constrain the debate to our own beer. And so now we're saying, it's not which beer you like, it's how you like our beer. And so they moved the discussion from talking about other brands to giving other people two different ways to talk about themselves. And if you bring that back to a more technical realm, being able to say, well, hey, I like, vendor C for this versus I like vendor C for that. Somehow vendor whatevers didn't get actually into the discussion. It's about how you use vendor C. And that turns into a very interesting vendor-specific discussion. You will probably see other people do that to you, and now you'll be able to spot it. That one's a little bit sneaky. So, and one more, because I actually find it very interesting. Also from recent history. Mistakes were made. Anybody remember that one? So, big political kerfuffle. Nobody actually wanted to blame anybody for it. Mistakes were made. The mistake happened by itself. There was a spontaneous mistake generation. Well, clearly not. But yet, so the destructive way to talk about it is everybody screwed up simultaneously, and therefore you want to make sure that nobody gets blamed for it. Nobody on my team anyway, right? So mistakes were made. But in a much more constructive way, and I think it's part of any healthy technological shop in general, is to say, yeah, a bad thing happened, a service incident happened. We don't care about who did it. We care about fixing it and making sure it won't happen again, with the assumption that the person won't do it again, because now they know what they need to not do. So that's another way of framing a debate, and especially if you're doing a post-action service incident report, and it's something really, really gnarly where you actually have to talk about it with a bunch of people, being able to pull the people out of it by framing it like that is going to be a lot more constructive for everybody involved, because otherwise you spend 45 minutes figuring out who to blame and you've gotten precisely nothing done. So that little bit of jujitsu will help as well. So, actually, just to stop for, so everybody with me so far? A few assertions? Okay. assertions about how it works, setting the boundaries of your talk, understanding how to frame the debate, understanding what that debate looks like. So let's talk about, so now we know how you're going to frame it. You've given people a box to live in. You've given them, we've figured out how we're going to talk about it, what the abstraction is, what the scope is. That's great. Now let's talk about building your model. By the way, I will note it now, I also note it at the end of the talk. There's a relatively new thing we're doing, so please give feedback. Feedback is important. Feedback is how we know either how to do this at all or how to do this better. All right, so when you're building a model, you're building a model. You have to get that model into somebody's head. You know what you're going to talk about, you know how you're going to talk about it. You may have a call to action, you may know what you want them to do about this. It may just be imparting knowledge that they may not have had before. And you want them to make sure that you can figure out what to do. So when you're building your model, the first thing I tell people, the first thing I will tell anyone who has to get up in front of customers for the first time or what have you is know 10 to teach 3, which is a short way of saying, take the amount of knowledge you have on a subject. You can probably effectively teach about 1/3 of it. Now, why is that true? Well, part of it is that when you actually have to talk to a bunch of people, you may not necessarily know what their technical levels are. You may not know, you may not know who's in the room. You don't know who got brought in at the last minute. You don't know if they had a bad breakfast burrito that morning or if they didn't have coffee. And so you're going to have to adapt during the talk. This also means that when you get questions out of left field, you're going to have to be able to adapt and reach deeper into your knowledge to satisfactorily answer whatever you're talking about. So, given that, on average, you can teach about 1/3 of what you know. If you're more skilled in teaching, you can teach a little bit more than that. But in reality, what you're going to want to do is when you rehearse, when you do this, because you're rehearsing, right? For these talks that you're doing, right? Okay. So when you're, great. Okay, there were a few assuring nods there. That makes me happy. When you rehearse for these talks, a lot of it is think about all of the things that you're uncomfortable talking about with respect to that topic during a talk. Think about all the things that you want to know about. That you're like, hey, I wish I knew more about that. And then ask yourself, is that something that somebody at the technical level that I would expect would reasonably ask? If so, take 5 minutes to learn it. You don't even have to go deep on it. You don't have to be a scholar on this thing that you may be giving a talk about in half an hour. But at least know how you're going to answer them. And that means looking inside yourself and doing the slightly uncomfortable work of figuring out what you don't know about the topic. There's always the stuff that you don't know, and we can't help you with that. That takes time. But for the stuff that you don't know, figure out how you're going to shape the talk so you either don't have to deal with it or you know how you're going to answer it. So, another thing that comes up when you're shaping your talk, choose your metaphors. I don't know if any of you played that kind of board game, Taboo. You've got to describe, you have to describe a thing, and here's the 5 most popular words to describe it, and you can't use any of them. So that may come up. You may not have access to those 5 words because you have an audience that doesn't understand those 5 words. They may not make sense to them. You may be dealing with a slightly more non-technical audience. You may be dealing with a more business-focused audience, where they could really care less about how many packets per second, how does this make me money? So one thing to think really hard about is build a library. If you have a topic that you want to talk on, sit down with a piece of paper or a text buffer or whatever you feel like doing, and write down how many metaphors you can come up with for how you can discuss that. How can I discuss a 3-way handshake, a TCP 3-way handshake? How can I discuss that with somebody? Well, it might be 2 people shaking hands and greeting each other. It might be other ways. But think about how you're going to describe it. Another exercise to go through in that regard is figure out how much time you have. Put time bounds on describing something. One of the exercises I go through with the people that I mentor in professional services is, okay, you've described the internet to me. You've described the internet to me in 15 minutes. Describe it in 5 minutes. Describe it in 2 minutes. Describe it in 30 seconds. Describe it in 1 sentence. Describe it to a 5-year-old. Because the fastest way to build up your library of metaphors is to be pinched for time. And I mean, that's the whole essence of, let's say, an elevator pitch, is that you have to throw out all the fancy wording, and you have to throw out everything that really sounds awesome to you, and distill what you know and the most important things down to the 30 seconds you get in an elevator. Being able to do that with any topic you have is a really interesting exercise. It won't make for world peace, it won't solve the world's problems, but it'll allow you to formalize what you have in your head for figuring out how you're going to talk about this topic. So I would say, after this, take a topic, run the exercises, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 30 seconds, 1 sentence, and see what you come up with. I think you're going to find that you're going to be able to talk about things much more effectively as a result. So, everybody with me so far? All right. Next thing I want to talk about defining your terms. So, 2 words, very important. Vocabulary matters. The way you talk about something, you're creating a model of pure thought. The way you talk about it is the way that you shape that model in somebody's head. I've gone over that. So it makes only sense that the words you choose are important. If I say the word social contract, this phrase social contract, in an informal conversation, we can have a discussion about what it means to wait for people to get out of the subway before you get into it. But if I say the word social contract to a contract lawyer, especially when they've been thinking about this, they're going to say there's no such thing, because they're thinking about the word contract in a much more formalized way. This goes for other topics you think about as well. When you describe, I go back to, when you start describing different subjects, think about the words you describe and think about what your audience will think of on these topics. More specifically, what are the reserved words? What are the reserved words for the people you're talking to? I'm sure most of you know, but just to go over, a reserved word in a programming language is something that's part of the syntax of the language, so you can actually use it for a variable name or things like that. Similarly, professions have reserved words. Let me give you a specific example. I was talking about a consulting practice, and we were going to make one of our offerings master services. You know, the really, really high level, PhD level stuff. Well, marketing said, you can't do that. I said, why? And the reason was that there's a term called the Master Services Agreement, which I'm sure a lot of you know about. A Master Services Agreement governing, okay, entity A is going to be of entity B, and here's everything about how entity A is going to engage with entity B on pricing and everything else. Master Services is a reserved word, reserved phrase. So you cannot use that when talking with people because you will introduce confusion into the topic. So, once again, think about what the reserved words are for who you're talking about. Choose your vocabulary appropriately. And this will also give you an opportunity to research who you're talking with and what they care about. You know, am I talking with marketing? Okay, here's the things they care about. Am I talking with sales? Here are the things they care about. Am I talking with director of ops? Here are the things they care about, and here are the words that are important to them. So, and the other thing along those lines is ask yourself, what words do you want to leave somebody with? If you give somebody new words to talk with somebody, to talk about something, if you give them new words, what do those words mean? Which is to say, if you say, hey, we're going to talk about enterprises moving to the cloud, we're going to talk about, you know, and they'll say, yes, we're going to be talking about hybrid clouds and virtualization, all this other stuff, and maybe a bunch of alphabet soup that goes with it. And those are the words you want to leave them with. And those will be new words for them. And so one of the traps that you get into, and you know, this goes, you know, it's the Hollywood joke, is that every single movie pitch is like, it's like X, but with Y. It's like the Terminator, but in ballroom dancing. I mean, I don't know, right? But the point is, I think I've seen that one. The point is that on one hand, that's a very, very efficient way of getting something to somebody's head. Maybe that's what they need. But that means that if someone tells that to you when you're trying to give them new concepts, so you're saying it's like X, but with Y. Well, now they're giving you two words they already know to try to explain your concept. And there's a mic there. So two words to explain what you already know, but that means that you're not able to get any more words into their heads. Occasionally that might be okay. Occasionally that might be reasonable. But most of the time, you're going to be in a situation where you want to get new words into somebody's head, and you're going to have to go back to choosing your metaphors. And you're going to have to go back to, let me show you, no, it's actually not like that at all. Let me show you what it means. Let me show you how it works. And so when someone says, hey, it's like this, right? I'm like, no, you make a very good point, but it's not really. Let me give you some new terminology to talk about that in. Let me tell you why it matters. That's part of building the thought model too. If all they use is the terminology they already have, they're going to try to place it into a thought model they already have. You won't be able to get anything new into their heads. So, one more thing, and then we're going to take a quick email break. So, anybody who's worked with me hears me go on about this all the time. So words are important. We knew that. And so are promises. By virtue of me being up in front of you right now, I have made an implicit promise to you, that being that I will do my best to give you useful information on the specific topic for which you walked into this room for. Hopefully I'm doing that. That is for you to decide. The point is, that is the promise I made, and now I have to keep it. But there are also other implicit promises that you make during a talk. So what happened? I got up here and I'm talking to you about Whiteboarding 101. Now I have a few credentials. I've been doing this kind of stuff very intensively and a lot for the past 3 years. I've thought about it a bunch. I've done a bunch of blog postings on it. So in general, if you're up front giving a talk, you are the expert in the room until proven otherwise. Everybody assumes that, give or take, you know what you're talking about because you're up here talking and they agreed to come in and listen to you talk. You know what you're talking about, you're the one there, you're speaking with authority, but people are constantly checking your credibility. Every sentence you say, people are checking against, does this sound like someone who knows what they're talking about? And with enough people in the room, I mean, you need a lot fewer than this, you can assume that every single word that comes out of your mouth is being checked against, does this actually make sense to me? And if you lose people, they're just going to check out. So one of the best ways to keep that expert status, and this one is kind of rules number 1 through 15. If someone does this in a meeting, if someone does this in a whiteboard presentation they're doing for me, and I have to rate that, a professional service person that I'm mentoring is doing a test presentation for me, on a scale of 1 to 10, this will get a -15. They violate this. Never. Never. Never make stuff up. Ever. Ever, 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 ever. Never be up here and make stuff up. Know what you're talking about. Understand what you're talking about. Because number one, that confidence will come through. But, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, it's not necessarily malice aforethought. You may not know that you are making stuff up. We're all pretty smart people in this room. We're all conversant on our technical topics, and I'd be willing to say we all learn pretty quickly. So, the problem is that breadth and enthusiasm doesn't necessarily make up for depth. And so, I'm going to put that one up there. I really like that one. Breadth plus enthusiasm does not equal depth. I like that one a lot. I'm going to keep using that one. So, creation. So, thank you. You're all awake. That's great. So, breadth plus enthusiasm does not equal depth. But when you're up there and you're talking and it's flowing and you're doing your thing and people are nodding, like, hey, they really get me, you'll do it anyway. You'll say, and it won't be something that you're completely fabricating. It'll be something that you're 90% sure of, or 70% sure of, or 50% sure of, or you're extrapolating on the fly to something that you don't even know if is part of the field of knowledge. And you'll probably get away with it. In fact, I can almost guarantee you'll get away with it unless there's someone in the room who explicitly cuts you out right there, at which point, well, I suggest you work on your people skills because you're going to need them real soon. But the question is not the first time you're asked, or if you say it. Because at best, now you've given them wrong information. That's the best thing that can happen over making stuff up. Congratulations. The worst thing that can happen is that you lose the credibility in the room. You probably won't get invited back for other talks. If you're on the sales side, pre-sales, post-sales, you might have burnt the customer. You've certainly burnt that relationship. And you've given them wrong information. That whoever comes after you is going to have to now correct. And they will have to, and they will lose credibility too in correcting what you laid before you. Never, ever, ever make stuff up. If that means you have to restrict what you're talking about, in order to be where you are confident advising someone who you're talking with, then so be it. If that means you have to say, I don't know, great. If that means I don't have a complete answer and I don't want to give you a wrong answer, awesome. Never make stuff up. It will only go poorly.
Have you ever said, I'm not sure, but?
Yes, I have said, so, thank you, Patrick. Patrick asked me, have I ever said, I'm not sure, but? And the answer is yes. As long as I flag it, I say, I'm making a guess based on this, but I don't think I'm wrong. I will check afterwards. So that's a lot of disclaimers, right? But if you believe that you're imparting useful information for something you're 95% sure of, there's the one exception, then you're saying, and if you flag it, and you say, I'm making a guess here. I don't think I'm wrong. This makes sense to me. I will double check to make that sure. Well, now you flagged it, and they're like, hey, he's thinking on the fly, doing the improv, improving, figuring on the data he has, and be able to move on. And there's nothing wrong with that. But in general, be aware. That is awareness. Being able to talk about things and say, yeah, and this is exactly what happens there, or yes, we can do that, or no, we can't do that, or yes, we can, that's going to take a lot of work, which is actually one of the worst things you can say, because now people ask you to do a lot of work to do it, and it might still be impossible. That's the perils of making stuff up. So, the one other thing when I talk about promises, so when I talk about promises, I also talk about promises you explicitly make. There's promises you implicitly make. I am the expert in the room and I will not lead you astray. Here's the promises I explicitly make, where I say, you ask me a question, hey, I don't know. That's the right answer. Hey, I don't know. Let me put that in the parking lot, this little corner of the board where I'm going to put all the things that I have to get back to you on to get back to you later. Well, you've just made a promise. Now, there's nothing wrong with the parking lot. You're keeping a list of things to follow up with the customer on. If you're in sales, it means you get another touch point with the customer. Ain't nothing wrong with that. But everything you put on the parking lot is a promise. It is a promise that you will learn the material. It is a promise that you will fully understand that material. It is a promise that you will respond to the customer with that material, or to your colleague or whoever. And it is also, and this is the tricky part, it is also a promise that you will respond to all of their follow-up questions on the material, because you're still the expert in the room. Congratulations. So the way that I tell mentees about this is I say, assume that for every item that you put in the parking lot, you're expending 45 minutes to an hour of your time to keep that promise. So it's all good to defer questions, and it's important to defer questions. Hey, I don't know, I'll get back to you. But remember what that costs in terms of time to do it. So one other brief note. Colors. Colors are very important. Colors are cool. I'm not using all that much of them lately. So colors can be very useful in framing a debate as well. Why? Now, once again, you can run into accessibility problems. People are colorblind, especially if we talk about red-green color blindness. But red bad, green good. We're humans, we do that. So we've been acculturated, that's fine. Red stop, green go. Black positive, red negative. All these things are just things we tie to colors. And so you can talk about things in terms of colors, and those are really, really important. So a couple of things about that. Number one, it takes time to cap and uncap your markers. If you're using colors all the time, then you're going to have to uncap. Why? Because these dry out. These dry out a lot, and they dry out fast. And this is more of a physical concern. So if you're keeping them uncapped, if you're not continuously writing with them, there's a continuous ink flow, it's going to get dry in about 2 to 3 minutes, depending upon the age of the marker. These are relatively new, for which I am thankful. And thankful to people who set it up for getting me whiteboard markers, whoever you may be. But remember, it takes time to cap and uncap markers, and you always have to cap your markers, otherwise they'll be dry, and you'll be stuck up at the board trying to write something on the board, and it all goes weird. So remember, they're very descriptive, they're very useful. Mechanically, if you're going to use colors during a presentation, keep using all of them so you can keep the ink flow going. So, with that, we have hit we've hit roughly the halfway mark. We get a little bit beyond that. And so, there is a mic up there, so we're going to take 5 minutes for questions before continuing. Are there any questions? One second, we're working on it. Hey, my microphone was on.
Magic.
Excellent. What's up?
Do you recommend setting an agenda on the whiteboard so that people know where you are, where you're going to, and where you're going to finish up? And then secondarily, one trick I was told is a very effective tool is to go ahead and poll the audience for specific things they would like to get out of today's talk. And for those things that you know you're not going to cover, you can right away say, well, we're not going to be going down that particular avenue. But for those that you do know, you write down those individual things so that when you do, in fact, go through all those things you know you're going to go through already anyway, then you can say, look, we did all these things that the group wanted us to do, and they feel better about it. So I was just curious about those two things.
Oh, no, totally. So first, about the agenda, and second, about goals for the talk. So the agenda, you've given me a good idea. I'd probably reposition that for the next unit we're talking about. So there's all like eight and a half units on here. The next unit after this break, we're going to talk about agendas. So we'll get to that in about 5 minutes. It's a really, really good point. Probably should be a little bit earlier. We'll get there, promise. I do promise that. Numero dos, talking about goals of the talk. So I didn't actively poll for that, but you might have noticed at the beginning when I said, here's what you will get out of this talk. So it was a thank you for coming. So it's kind of invocation. Thank you for coming. This is the talk this is the talk we're going to be having today. By the end of this talk, you will know X, Y, and Z. And so another way so that's one path to that. Another very useful way, depending upon what you're trying to do, is actually figuring out, okay, how many of you want to get better at this? How many of you want to do this? How many of you want to do that? And since we're here, thank you, Mr. Norton. How many of you in this room, I'm going to poll, show of hands, how many of you in this room want to get better at doing technical presentations? Awesome, practically all of you. I saw that. One hand per person. So, how many of you in this room feel pretty confident with your current level of technical presentation skills? Mezzo, yeah, about half. And some of those are, now I promise on this next poll, you're not going to hurt my feelings. How many of you have gotten useful stuff out of this so far? Practically all of you. Good. Then we'll continue. I'm going to give you 1 more minute to check your email, and then we'll continue. And we're back. Everybody got that? I really like that one. Okay. So, a couple of people came up to me during the break, and I'm just going to rehash a couple of things because I thought they were kind of great. How do you check that people are actually engaged with you during a meeting? How do you check that, well, not they're engaged with you, but that they understood what you were talking about? And the answer there is, unfortunately, you really can't. They have to take time to assimilate that themselves and fill it in. It's not until, the next morning when they're in the shower and they go, oh, that thing with the stuff, it did stuff. I totally get that stuff now with the things. And that's when they get it. That's when they understand the stuff with the things, which is important. So you don't get that feedback right away. You may get it by people coming after you immediately wanting to ask you additional stuff, like people did here. That made me very happy. But in general, you just don't know. Another thing that came up is, how do you keep people who are remote on, let's say, an audio bridge engaged? And there are a bunch of ways. I can tell you the ways that have worked for me and the teams I work with. Explicitly check in with the people on the phone. If it's a smaller group, if it's like 60 people on chained audio bridges and you've done something horrible, we'll talk about that in a second. But in general, say, okay, I know what you're talking about. People on the phone, do you understand what's going on? Yes, no, maybe. And check in with them pretty often. I've checked in with you roughly every 20 minutes. Can't really set a clock to it, but that's roughly what I did. With people on the phone, I'm going to check in a lot more often. I'm going to check in about every 10 minutes because I need to know they're there. If it's a much larger group, I may have the audio bridge muted that I have them dial into, and then say, by the way, send all questions via instant messenger to this person in the room. And then every 20 minutes or so, we'll go by questions that have already been put in. So there's always a way for people on the audio bridge who you cannot get the feedback from to signal their engagement and signal questions. Because if everybody on the audio bridge has no questions and people in the room do have questions, they will take that as a signal to catch up. Because clearly the people inside the room are more engaged and they should be more engaged. And they're missing out on something. We're human, these things happen. So, one other thing that came up in terms of reserved words was talking about how, if you think in terms of financial terms, black is positive, red is negative. But if you think in terms of electrical engineering, right? Red is positive, black is negative. Know your audience. That was my bad. And I thank that man over there in the red shirt for pointing that out to me. So, let's continue. We have until 11. That means we have 23 minutes and not much time. Let's talk about agendas. I do agree, this should have gone a little bit earlier. Agendas. Agendas are magic. Agendas are what can guide you. They are your notes. They are the signposts that people use to talk about everything that they're going to talk to in the conversation. They are also promises. I use that word a lot, but it is important. It is a promise that you will get to everything in that agenda. And if you don't, you better have a really good reason. So when you talk about an agenda, it gives people a way to guide through the talk. But the greatest thing about agendas is you can blame them. Agendas can be blamed. Hey, that's a really interesting question right there, but we have a lot of material to cover today, and I'll get back to you later. Let's take that offline. Hopefully I'm not quite that slick about it most of the time, right? But reality is, if you need to drag things bodily back onto topic, blaming the agenda, because what are they going to do, yell at the agenda, is a really, really effective way to do it, saying, you were saying, you person are keeping you from learning everything that you came here to learn. It's kind of fun, a little bit of jujitsu there. But realistically, people understand that. People understand that by wanting to go really deep in a way that may be out of scope for a discussion, they're keeping themselves and everyone else in the room from learning everything they want to learn. And so they will typically take it offline and move on from there. And if they don't, well, we'll get to that in a second. So have an agenda, know your agenda, stick to your agenda. I haven't written on the board, and I probably should have, but I have an agenda here. In fact, what I'm going to do, because I feel like it, is write the two last things that I want to cover. After this talk, there will be slides with a full set of notes up. I didn't want to have to try to work whiteboard and slides at the same time because that looks like it might have been fun, but it wouldn't have worked. So there will be a full set of notes up afterwards for you to download that you can take a look at yourselves. So, agendas. A lot of this is about controlling the conversation. How do you control what gets talked about in this formalized setting where you're supposed to control what gets talked about? Maybe you're giving a technical presentation to a customer. Maybe you're the moderator of a panel. Maybe you're giving another kind of technical talk. Maybe you're having a political debate, I don't know. But there's specific material you want to cover, and you want to make sure that you control things so you do. Now, obviously, all in moderation. Every single one of us in this room, I feel pretty confident saying this, every single one of us in this room has been in some kind of sales meeting where you're there, the vendor's pitching you, and the salesperson is hell-bent on getting through everything they want to talk about. They've got 85 slides, and they're going to show you every single one of them, come hell or high water. And what happens? They succeed. They brush off your questions perfunctorily. Is that a word? Perfunctorily. They brush off your questions. They say, oh, I'll get back to you later, and they never actually do. But they're going to get through those 85 slides. And at the end, they do. Congratulations. And what are you left with? Again, this guy's kind of a jerk. He didn't answer my questions. He didn't actually understand why he was here, she was here. They didn't actually understand what I needed from them and what I needed, because the talk is not about you, the speaker. This talk is not about me. This talk is about making sure that I have this thought model in my heads for how whiteboards happen and getting that into your heads because you're here because you theoretically want that. So it can never be about getting through all my agenda. And if you take a look at the notes, you'll find there's one unit that's going to be missing from what I'm talking about because we're a little bit pressed for time. And you'll get to read that too. So one other thing in that regard is invocation and conclusion. Invocation. Good morning. My name is Matt Ringel. I'm from Akamai Technologies. I'm here to talk with you about how not to suck at doing technical presentations. Here's what we're going to talk. I'm sorry? I'm sorry. ABC. I don't know that. I know vaguely what you're talking about. I don't know that one. So, but it's the idea that, thank you. Here's what we're here to talk about. Here's how we're going to talk about it. Here's what you will be able to leave with. Let's begin. The stage is set, and we start. At the end, after Q&A and after everything else, thank you very much for coming. I hope you learned a lot. This actually is true. I will be holding office hours afterwards. If people want to sit down and actually work through a presentation, I'll be able to help you with that, to actually give you some critique if you're interested. And that is an offer I make to you. And thank you very much for coming. Conclusion. Invocation, conclusion. Those are important to humans. Humans like those. Ask any spiritual leader. People want to know there's a beginning. People want to know there's an end, so that they can enter and leave the space of learning. They know when it begins. They know when it ends. So, and one last thing, and this is just a fun fact for giving a talk. Choose 3 proxies. So there are roughly 45 of you in this room. 45, 50 of you in this room. I cannot look at each one of your smiling faces. I cannot evaluate each one of you individually. But I can evaluate 3 of you. No, I'm not going to tell you who they are. It changes on a regular basis. And I look at the 3 of you in the room at various times to determine what the mood of that room is. If a person on the left is kind of checked out, I'm going, well, maybe the left's kind of checked out. If I'm looking in the center and you're engaged, hey, the center's engaged. If I'm looking on the right and they're looking defensive, like, what did I say that really set people off? And if you periodically check between the 3, mechanically, people will think you're always looking at them. By moving your gaze around the room, people want to feel looked at. People want to know that you are addressing them and them alone, even in a room of large amount of people. And so people will make all sorts of pattern matching, like, hey, he's looking at my generation, maybe he's looking at me. Maybe I'm the one they're addressing here. And so just by choosing 3 proxies, A, you get the feedback, B, people feel like you're engaged with them. Kind of neat, does work, promise. So let's go on to, let's see, how much time do we have left? 15 minutes, here we go. I'm gonna go through these pretty quickly because you're all probably very familiar with them. Pitfalls. Things that geeks do. Why? Because we're geeks. First one. Knowledging at the audience. And what do I mean by that? Knowledging at the audience is a way of saying, hi, I have no structure to my talk, and so I'm just going to dump all the data I have on this topic at you in some random order. Because that's how I talk with my friends. Because, you know, we're trying to establish status with each other because we're humans. And we want to exchange knowledge with each other. And hey, did you find the cool thing? Yeah, I found this other cool thing. Hey, we both found cool things. But that's not a talk. That's a chat. That's not a structured talk. And as soon as you start knowledging at your audience, possibly because you may have lost the plot, possibly because you may have gone off the rails and don't know how to go back on, so you revert back to the conversational mode of, here's all the things I want to talk about. Well, now I can guarantee you've lost everybody and give them a prime opportunity to check their mail. Don't do that. Remember the song you set out to play. Remember the talk you set out to give. Bring it back. Pause. Doing that kind of thing is actually a panic reaction. Hey, I'm going to go back to my comfort zone because I've completely lost it. Stall, give yourself about 10 to 12 seconds. Fun fact, the reason that counting to 12 works, counting to 10 works when you're angry, is because that allows the neocortex to take over from the amygdala, and that allows you to get the reaction time to have your conscious brain take care of things. Give yourself 10 seconds. Pause. Not for 10 seconds, we don't have time. But take the time, get back to the plot. Let's see, other things I want to go over here. Taking questions personally. I got technical knowledge, you're questioning my knowledge. I feel defensive. Why? Because you think I'm stupid. No, I don't think you're stupid. I have a question, I want to know it. And if you take it personally, as a speaker, you're going to get defensive. Don't do that. It's only going to end in pain. Remember, once again, just saying to yourself, it's not about me. It's not about me. It's not about me. These people want to learn from me. I am the expert in the room. They want to learn from me. They're not questioning my authority or my ability. And just make sure that you don't get into the geek and the antlers and clashing and stuff. You know, it's all bad. We've gone over making stuff up. I'm not going to go over that again. Just don't do it, except for the noted exception. Thank you, Patrick. And breaking the flow with details. The occasional fun fact's kind of fun. It breaks things up. But if you go really into the weeds on a topic, I mean, okay, everybody knows a person who's ruined a joke by saying, so you won't believe what happened last Friday. Oh, it was Thursday. No, wait, it was Tuesday. What was the day that I went to take out the trash? And no, it was Wednesday. And like, they never actually start the joke, and by then you've lost attention. Everybody knows somebody like that. You may have been that person. During a talk, it's just as deadly. Arguing with yourself over, arguing over yourself about details will only go poorly, because now you've completely lost the audience, because the only person you're talking to in the room is yourself. And nobody wants to hear that. So the last thing I'm going to go to, because I do want to leave time for a little bit of Q&A, problem people. All discussion of problem people in this discussion is completely fictional. Any resemblance to anybody around here is completely coincidental. Let's begin. So, there's 4 of them. Sniper. This is the person who always has a comment but never wants to participate. They're the person in a smaller group discussion, they're always going over to the, hey, he has no idea what he's talking about, does he? Oh God, I can't believe he did that thing. Oh, well, oh, duh. Check this cat video on Facebook. Things like that. They're the one who always has a comment and never wants to participate. And that's because of lack of confidence on their part. They want to be up there. They want to be speaking, but they don't want to. They're too afraid to actually speak, to be up there in front of an audience, but they want the attention. So they're doing it as side conversations to people around them. The way that you get around that is by including them in the conversation whether they like it or not. Include them. Some of you are probably familiar with this in 2nd grade. Jimmy, do you have anything you'd like to share with the class? Same thing. Same exact thing. Sir, you had a question. Oh, no. 5 minutes later. Sir, you had a question. No, I really want to hear this. Please tell me. Please just go up to the mic. We got it all set. What's your question? Because now, doing outside of Q&A, you've now gotten to the point where they're stopping the whole conversation and you're giving them the attention that they theoretically want, which means that they will now go back to their seat and slink away. It's not the most pleasant thing in the world, but if they're disrupting your conversation, it is what you have to do. Número 2. The bully. And it may not be that they're a jerk in general, but they might be having a mimetic immune response. You have said something that is so objectionable to the way that they think of the world. Your model is the exact antimatter to the thought model they have in their head. They're like, oh, this is ridiculous. I don't want to be here. If it's a small group discussion, they may actually start getting really confrontational with you, saying, you're wrong. Number 1, it's still not about you. Don't take it personally. They don't hate you. They hate the idea. Address the idea. Play the ball, not the player. If they are being insistent, then the thing you need to do is isolate them. Isolate, do not escalate. They want you to get angry. They want you to bring them down to their level. They want to fight. They want you to fight them. If they throw a punch and you don't fight them, well, they're angry. But at some point, they're going to burn themselves out, because what they're having is an immediate response. And they're only ones in the room who are having it. And as long as they don't try to take center stage, then letting them go on for 30 seconds in silent and just have them silence and realize that no one's responding to them in a theoretically professional environment will burn them out. And you'll be able to continue once they realize that no one is rising to the bait. If they insist on going on, if there's hopefully there's someone in the room with more authority than them, directly ask a question of somebody in authority related to the topic, because they'll respond to authority. And know that there's ramifications to it. Number 3, the status seeker. You ever have somebody in a talk where they ask a question, but you're pretty sure they don't actually want the answer? They're there to ask the question. They're there to show, hey, I am the smartest guy in the room. I'm asking a question, ain't I smart? Which is a colossal waste of time for you as the speaker, because now you have to answer a question that the answer is just going to get discarded, but they feel better about themselves that day. And how you figure out this person who's the status seeker? Do they use I a lot? Well, you know, I found that blah, 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 and what I would do in this situation, and I, which is why it's number 4, which we haven't gotten to yet. But, you know, are they trying to bring the spotlight on themselves actively? Unlike the sniper, they actually want the attention. They actually want to be up there. They want to be the smartest person in the room. 5 minutes, awesome. If we can run a little bit over into the break, that would be good for Q&A. Great. So people want to stick around, we can do questions. In their case, all they're looking for is knowledge that they're the smartest person in the room. Acknowledge them. Acknowledge their question. Defer if necessary. Acknowledge and defer. Don't waste time. If all they're looking for is status, if all they want is a pat on the head, give them a pat on the head and move on with life, because that's all they want. And last but not least, number 4. Raise the hands. Anybody know this author by the name of John Scalzi? A few. Good science fiction author. Really fun stuff. He had a phrase. Now, but I don't know about you, but I reach into my Klingon heritage and pronounce that Nakmok. What does it stand for? Not a question, more of a comment. So, you've probably seen this in panel discussion. Someone bellies up to the mic. They say, well, this is not actually a question, but maybe it is. And would the panel agree that blah, 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 blah for the next 5 minutes? And they don't actually have a question. They clearly just wanted to get up in front of a mic and say their piece and show, I am the smartest person in the room, and I will do it by making a statement and not a question. Any similarity to current events is completely coincidental. So, what do you do? I mean, and so what are a few things that come over? Because this kind of like defense against the dark arts here. So what things do you find along? You find stuff like, well, this isn't actually a question, but ... Would the speaker or panel agree that ... I was wondering if ... These are all flags that you're dealing with a Nakmok. Every single one of them. The solution? Cut them off. This is not actually a question. Great, can you hold it till afterwards? Next. Will the speaker agree that? No. Next. I was wondering if, no. Next. I tend to think of myself as a fairly okay speaker. Everybody has room to improve. I am not kind to that 4th type. I see no reason to be kind to that 4th type, because that will drain the energy out of your discussion. Because they will go on for 5 minutes, and they haven't organized their talk, and so they're going to jump from topic to topic for nothing going to do that actually but just satisfy them, and they will take all the air out of the room, and they will take all the energy out of the room. And at the end of it, the moderator of the panel or the speaker will have to completely reboot the conversation, and everybody has to wonder where they were, and now most of the people in the room are checking their email because they're all checked out, because who wants to listen to Mr. Nakmok? So, that's the story. Thus endeth the presentation. thank you very, very much for listening. I hope you got a lot out of this. I said, if you want to come up to me afterwards, I'll be glad to talk with people for any length of time, as long as you don't keep me too far from lunch, because, hungry. And also, if you find me anytime over the next couple of days, as it turns out I'm leaving Thursday now. If you have flights out of Atlanta for tomorrow, please change them if you haven't already. No, seriously. Oh yeah, and get your room extended before noon. Yeah, get your room extended too if you're going to do that, because when they start measuring the forecast in terms of half inches of ice, yeah, bad. So anyway, that has been your public service announcement. But I'll be glad to talk with anybody during the next couple of days. Obviously now, if you want to run in like, hey, can I get a room? We're good. For whatever mechanisms NANOG has for feedback, please give feedback. This is a relatively new format. It's talking more about the soft skills that surround everything we do, and want to know if more of it would be useful. And obviously, if you have any feedback for me, feel free to talk to me. Actually, put that up on the board so you can write these things down. Either ringle@akamai.com or Twitter at Ringle. Find me. Please do not hesitate to send me a mail or come up to me right now. If you have questions, I can take them right now. We can run a little bit over, and we have a mic. So, or if not, does anyone go up to the mic or have questions? Or anybody just want to stand around and talk with me afterwards? We're good? All right. Thank you very much for your time.